I never thought one single moment could change the way I looked at someone forever. That night still lives in my mind like it just happened yesterday. The silence of the house was heavy, the kind that makes every small sound feel louder. I pushed the door open, not expecting anything unusual, but what I saw stopped my breath and left me frozen. She was there, vulnerable, unguarded, a version of her I had never seen before. For years, she had been just another part of my life, someone I admired from a distance, someone I thought I understood. But in that moment, all the lines blurred, and my chest tightened with a rush of feelings I couldn't name. A mix of shock, curiosity, and something far deeper that scared me more than anything. That I stood there, my hand gripping the doorframe, my mind telling me to turn away, but my heart pulling me closer into the kind of storm you can't escape. I didn't know then that this night would mark the beginning of a story that would change everything. A story about love, fear, secrets, and the courage to face feelings we are taught to bury, because sometimes life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It throws you into the fire, and all you can do is decide whether to run, or to finally let yourself burn. The first time I realized something inside me was shifting, it was so small I almost ignored it. The room was quiet, only the faint hum of the ceiling fan cutting through the silence. I had lived with her for months, sharing the same space, laughing about small things, passing each other in the kitchen half asleep, and never once thinking too deeply about it. She was just my roommate, the woman who rented the other room in the apartment, nothing more. But that night, everything felt different. I had opened her door by mistake, half distracted, half restless, and what I saw stayed in my chest long after I closed it. She was asleep, her hair falling wild over the pillow, her breathing soft and unguarded. The light from the street slipped in through the blinds, tracing the lines of her face, making her look like a painting I wasn't supposed to see. I froze for a moment, caught between the need to leave and the strange pull to stay. It was not about her body or the accident of the moment, it was something else, something deeper. Vulnerability. Trust. A closeness I had never allowed myself to feel with anyone. I shut the door quickly, my heart pounding, and leaned against the wall in the hallway, wondering why my chest ached like I had been caught doing something wrong. I couldn't sleep after that. I tossed and turned, staring at the ceiling, remembering the softness of her face in the half-darkness, remembering how she looked when she didn't know anyone was watching. It made me restless in a way I didn't understand. She had always been kind, always thoughtful in her quiet ways, but I had never paid attention to how she made me feel until that night. It was like something sharp had cut through the dull rhythm of my days, and now all I could hear was the echo. The next morning, I tried to act normal. She walked into the kitchen with messy hair and a sleepy smile, the same as every other morning, and poured coffee into her favorite chipped mug. I watched her from the other side of the table, pretending to scroll on my phone, but my hands were shaking. She said good morning, her voice warm, and I nearly forgot how to answer. I wondered if she noticed the way I was looking at her, or if she could feel the heaviness of the secret I was suddenly carrying. Nothing had happened, not really, yet it felt like everything inside me had changed overnight. I found myself paying attention to things I had ignored before, the way she curled her legs on the couch when she read, the way her laughter filled the whole apartment, the way she hummed under her breath when she cooked. These small things, so ordinary, had become unbearable to watch because they stirred something I didn't want to admit. I told myself it was just a phase, just loneliness, just me reading too much into a small accident. But the truth was I had crossed an invisible line inside myself, and there was no going back. Every time I heard her moving around in her room, every time her door creaked open, I felt a rush of something between fear and longing. I didn't know what to do with it, so I kept quiet. I laughed when she laughed, I nodded when she talked, I carried on with the easy routine we had built together, but under the surface, my thoughts were loud, restless, and hungry. That night had planted something in me I couldn't kill, no matter how hard I tried to ignore it. The days after that night stretched strangely, filled with moments that seemed ordinary on the surface but felt unbearably heavy to me. Every time I looked at her, I was caught between pretending nothing had changed and knowing everything inside me already had. She leaned over the counter one evening, scrolling on her phone, her hair tied loosely, her sweater sliding off her shoulder, and I caught myself staring too long. I quickly turned away, pretending to check the oven, but my chest was burning. I kept asking myself why I was suddenly so restless around her, why my mind refused to let go of that night, and why I felt guilty for feelings I couldn't even name. It was not just attraction, it was something more complicated, something raw, like my heart had found a language it had been waiting years to speak. The problem was, I didn't know if she could hear it too, that we went about our days like always, and yet I noticed the small things more. When she spoke, I listened harder, catching every detail of her stories, wanting to hold on to them longer than I should. When she laughed, I found myself smiling even when I didn't want to. I realized I was remembering the exact sound of her voice when she said my name, the exact way her eyes softened when she was relaxed. These were the things that made my chest ache, the quiet things that no one else would notice. But I noticed them all, every single one. One night, she knocked on my door with 2 mugs of tea in her hands. It was late, the apartment was quiet, and the city outside was just a blur of distant lights. She stepped inside, her hair messy, her face tired but soft. She handed me the tea and sat on the edge of my bed like it was the most natural thing in the world. We had done this before, talked about random things late into the night, but now it felt different. I was suddenly aware of how close she was, of how her knee brushed mine when she sat down, of how her scent wrapped around me. She started talking about her day, something about a coworker who annoyed her, and I laughed at the right places, but my mind was somewhere else. I was thinking about how I wanted to reach out, to tuck that loose strand of hair behind her ear, to see what would happen if I let myself lean into the pull I felt. But I didn't. I just sipped my tea and nodded, hiding the storm inside me. After she left, I sat awake for hours, staring at the empty mug on my nightstand. My chest was tight, my thoughts loud. I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was nothing. Something inside me was growing, filling every quiet moment between us, and it terrified me because I didn't know if she would ever feel the same. I didn't know if confessing would ruin everything, or if silence would eat me alive slowly. The following week, it only got worse. We went grocery shopping together, walked down the aisles side by side, and I caught myself watching the way she picked up fruit, how she read labels with quiet focus, how she smiled at the cashier with easy charm. These were small, ordinary things, yet to me they were unbearable because of how deeply I was noticing them. At night, when I lay in bed, I replayed these moments over and over, until they became heavier than I could carry. One evening, she fell asleep on the couch with a book resting on her chest. I walked into the living room and stopped, my breath caught in my throat. She looked so peaceful, her face relaxed, her breathing steady. I stood there for too long, my heart aching with something that felt like longing and fear tangled together. I wanted to sit next to her, to hold that moment close, but instead I quietly turned off the lamp and walked back to my room, my hands trembling. I shut the door and leaned against it, wondering how much longer I could keep hiding what was happening to me. It wasn't just a crush anymore, it wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was deeper, heavier, something I couldn't deny. Every day that passed made me realize I wasn't imagining it. I was falling for her, piece by piece, and there was no turning back. The tension inside me grew heavier with every passing day, like a quiet storm I was carrying alone. I told myself over and over to act normal, to keep things the way they had always been, but the harder I tried, the more impossible it became. I couldn't look at her without feeling something stir deep in my chest, and I couldn't hear her voice without imagining things I was too afraid to admit. Living in the same apartment meant there was no escape. Every corner held pieces of her, and every routine forced me closer to what I was trying so hard to bury. It was late one Friday evening when everything seemed to boil over. We had ordered takeout, sprawled on the couch with cartons of noodles between us, and a movie playing in the background. She laughed at something silly on the screen, leaning back comfortably, her foot brushing against my leg as if it didn't mean anything. For her, it probably didn't, but for me, it was enough to make my pulse race. I tried to focus on the food, on the movie, on anything that could distract me, but my eyes kept drifting back to her, to the way her lips curved when she smiled, to the way her eyes glowed with amusement. She caught me staring once and raised an eyebrow with a half smile, asking if something was wrong. I shook my head quickly, laughing it off, but inside I was unraveling. After the movie ended, she stayed curled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I offered to clean up the mess, grateful for the chance to leave the room and catch my breath. In the kitchen, I stood by the sink, clutching an empty carton, and whispered to myself that I had to stop this. I had to stop reading into every small touch, every glance, every word. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the truth was there, I didn't want it to stop. When I returned, she had dozed off again, her phone slipping from her hand onto the couch cushion. I hesitated, watching her from the doorway, my heart tight. She looked so calm, so unguarded, and I felt that same ache I had felt before, the one that left me restless and awake at night. I walked quietly to the couch, picked up her phone, and placed it gently on the table. For a moment, I stood there, fighting the urge to reach out, to brush the hair from her face, to touch her hand. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled a blanket from the armchair and draped it over her. She shifted slightly, sighing softly, and I froze, afraid she would wake and catch me hovering. But she didn't. She simply sank deeper into sleep, leaving me standing there with my heart in pieces. That night, lying in my bed, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had been to crossing the line. The thought scared me and thrilled me at the same time. I wanted to tell her, to lay everything bare, but fear kept me silent. Fear of ruining what we had, fear of losing her, fear of being misunderstood. And yet, silence was becoming its own kind of torture. Over the next few days, the distance between what I felt and what I said only grew. She seemed oblivious, moving through our shared routines with her usual ease, while I carried a secret so heavy it threatened to crush me. One evening, she suggested we go for a late walk, just to clear our heads after a long day. The streets were quiet, the air cool, and the city lights painted everything in a soft glow. We walked side by side, talking about nothing important, but all I could think about was how close her hand was to mine. I kept my hands shoved into my jacket pockets, afraid that if I let them out, they would find hers on their own. She told me a story about her childhood, laughing at her own silliness, and I laughed with her, but my heart ached because I wanted to be more than just someone who shared an apartment with her. I wanted to be the one she confided in, the one she leaned on, the one she chose. Back at the apartment, she made us tea before bed, handing me a steaming mug with a soft smile. I took it, my fingers brushing hers, and for a split second, it felt like the world stopped. It was nothing, a tiny accidental touch, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at her, wondering if she had felt it too, but she was already turning away, humming softly as she moved around the kitchen. I stood there, gripping the mug too tightly, and realized I was losing control of myself. The feelings I had tried so hard to suppress were only getting stronger, and I couldn't keep them hidden forever. Something had to give, and I didn't know if I was ready for the moment it finally did. The silence in the apartment grew heavier for me, not because anything had changed on the outside but because everything inside me had. I woke each morning to the sound of her moving around, the faint clatter of dishes, the soft hum of her voice drifting through the walls, and each sound cut deeper than before. I used to think of these things as background noise, ordinary and unremarkable, but now they filled me with an ache I couldn't shake. Every glance, every brush of her hand, every smile lingered with a weight I could no longer carry lightly. It was late one night when the truth of it all pressed down on me the hardest. She was in her room, music playing faintly through the door, while I lay awake staring at the ceiling. I tried to distract myself with my phone, scrolling endlessly, but no matter how far I went, I always ended up back at the thought of her. I thought about her laugh, about the curve of her face when she was lost in thought, about how easily she made the apartment feel like home. I thought about the small things she did, leaving a blanket folded neatly on the couch, buying snacks she knew I liked, remembering details I had long forgotten about myself. And each memory felt like a knife, sharp and undeniable. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The breaking point came quietly, in the simplest of moments. We were both in the kitchen making dinner, moving around each other in a rhythm that had become natural over time. She reached for the spice rack just as I turned to grab a pan, and we collided, her hand brushing against mine. It was nothing, a small accidental touch, but the way my chest tightened told me it wasn't nothing at all. I looked up, and for a fraction of a second, our eyes met in a way that felt heavier than it should. She laughed softly, brushing it off, but I couldn't. My heart was pounding too hard, my throat too tight, my thoughts too loud. I excused myself quickly, retreating to my room under the excuse of a headache, but once I closed the door, I leaned against it and let the truth crash over me. I was in love with her. Not just a crush, not just curiosity, I was in love, deeply and dangerously, and I didn't know what to do with it. Over the next few days, I noticed myself pulling away without meaning to. I avoided long conversations, I busied myself with errands, I hid behind headphones when she was around. But the distance didn't make it easier, it made it worse. She noticed, of course she did. One evening she asked me directly, her eyes searching mine with quiet concern. "Are you okay? You seem different lately." I wanted to tell her everything right then, but the words stuck in my throat. I nodded, gave her a weak smile, and said I was just tired. She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. That night, lying in bed, I realized I was trapped in a choice I couldn't avoid. I could keep silent and let the weight of it crush me, or I could speak and risk losing everything we had. Both options terrified me. I thought about what it would mean if she didn't feel the same, about the awkward silence that would follow, about the possibility of breaking something that had been so safe and comforting until now. But I also thought about what it would mean if she did feel something too, even if it was just a fraction of what I felt. That possibility was enough to keep me awake until dawn, staring into the dark, torn between fear and hope. The next evening, she knocked on my door again with that easy smile of hers, holding 2 mugs of tea. She sat on the edge of my bed, just like before, talking about her day, her words light and casual. I watched her, every detail burning into my mind, the way her hands curled around the mug, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved, the way her laughter softened the edges of the room. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't hide much longer. Whether I was ready or not, the truth was waiting, pressing against the edges of every silence between us. And sooner or later, it was going to spill out. The tension between us had grown so thick I could feel it even in the smallest silences. She didn't know the storm raging inside me, but somehow she sensed something had shifted, because her eyes lingered on me longer than before, and her questions came softer, as if she was trying to reach the parts of me I was hiding. I kept telling myself to breathe, to hold it together, to not let my feelings spill out too soon, but the truth was leaking out in ways I couldn't control. The way my voice softened when I said her name, the way I memorized every detail of her face without meaning to, the way my laughter came too easily around her, it was all slipping through. I knew she could feel it, even if she didn't understand it. It was a rainy Saturday when everything felt too heavy to bear. The two of us stayed inside all day, curled on opposite ends of the couch with a blanket draped between us, the sound of the rain filling the room. She had her book, I had my thoughts, and the closeness was both comforting and unbearable. At one point she looked up from the pages, catching me staring before I could look away. Her brow furrowed slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but then she closed the book slowly instead. "You've been distant lately," she said softly, her voice careful, almost fragile. My heart hammered in my chest. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I shook my head, muttered something about being tired, and forced a weak smile. But she didn't look convinced. She leaned forward, her eyes locking on mine, and for a moment it felt like she could see everything I had been hiding. The silence that followed was unbearable. I wanted to tell her, to let it all pour out, but fear kept me chained. Fear of ruining this, fear of watching her eyes change the moment she realized what I felt. So instead, I excused myself, retreating to my room under the pretense of needing rest. But the truth was, I couldn't face her. Not when my chest felt like it was about to break open. I sat on the floor by my bed, listening to the rain pounding against the windows, and I hated myself for being such a coward. Later that night, she knocked on my door again, her voice soft. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, staring at the doorknob as though it held the answer to everything. Finally, I told her yes, and she stepped inside, carrying the same blanket from the couch. She sat down beside me on the floor without a word, wrapping the blanket over both of us. The silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty, it was heavy, charged, filled with everything unspoken. Finally, she turned her head toward me, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "You don't have to pretend with me," she whispered. "If something's wrong, I want to know." Her words pierced me, cutting through every wall I had built. My throat tightened, my chest ached, and before I could stop myself, I whispered, "It's you." The words slipped out like a confession I had been choking on for weeks. Her eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise, but she didn't pull away. The silence that followed was thick, my heart beating so loud I was sure she could hear it. For a moment, I wished I could take it back, wished I could stuff the words back inside me, but it was too late. The truth was out, raw and trembling in the air between us. She didn't say anything at first, and the quiet almost broke me. I turned away, ashamed, ready for rejection, but then she reached out and gently touched my hand. The warmth of her fingers against mine was enough to send a shiver through my whole body. When I finally looked back at her, her expression was softer than I had ever seen it. Not judgment, not anger, just something unreadable, something that gave me the smallest flicker of hope. She squeezed my hand lightly, and though she still hadn't spoken, that single touch was enough to tell me that maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't as hopeless as I had feared. That night, after she left the room, I lay awake replaying every second in my mind. The rain had stopped, the apartment was silent, but inside me everything was loud and alive. The secret was no longer mine alone, and though the uncertainty scared me, there was a strange relief in knowing she finally knew the truth. What came next, I couldn't predict, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The days that followed felt like I was walking on fragile glass, every step careful, every glance charged with meaning I couldn't fully understand. After my confession, nothing had been said outright, but everything had changed. I could feel it in the way she moved around me, softer somehow, more deliberate, like she too was aware of the air between us. Each word exchanged carried weight, each silence spoke louder than before, and though she hadn't given me an answer, her presence felt like one. I didn't know if it was hope or if I was just desperate enough to read too much into it, but her touch on my hand that night replayed in my mind 1,000 times. One evening she suggested we cook dinner together, something simple, pasta and salad. Normally these nights felt easy, filled with laughter and small jokes, but this time it was different. We stood side by side, chopping vegetables, passing spoons back and forth, and each time our hands brushed, I felt a spark that made my chest tight. She didn't pull away, and that small detail kept my heart racing. I tried to focus on the meal, on the scent of garlic sizzling in the pan, but all I could think about was how close she was, how our shoulders kept brushing, how her laughter seemed softer now, as though it was meant just for me. When we sat down to eat, the silence stretched longer than usual. She pushed her fork around her plate, her gaze flicking to me and then back down again. Finally, she set the fork aside and leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. That night, she began, her voice low, almost hesitant, "When you said it was me, were you serious?" My heart jumped to my throat. I set my fork down slowly, my hands trembling. For a moment, I thought about lying, about laughing it off as a joke, but the weight in her eyes told me she wanted the truth. So I nodded, my voice shaking as I whispered, "I meant every word." The silence that followed was unbearable. She didn't look away, didn't laugh, didn't frown. She just stared at me, as though she was searching for something in my face. Finally, she said quietly, "I don't know what to say." Her words stung, but her tone was not harsh, it was careful, uncertain. I wanted to reach across the table, to beg her to understand, but I stayed still, afraid of pushing too far. "You don't have to say anything," I murmured. "I just needed you to know." She looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her plate, and for a moment, I thought the conversation was over. But then she lifted her head again, her eyes softer now, and said, I never expected this. From you." The honesty in her voice made my chest ache. I wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know if there was even a trace of possibility in her hesitation, but I stayed quiet, letting her words hang between us. That night, we didn't speak much more. We cleaned up the dishes in silence, and when she said goodnight at my door, her voice trembled slightly. I lay awake for hours, torn between hope and despair, wondering if I had made a mistake, if I had pushed too far, or if maybe, just maybe, she was fighting her own storm the way I was. The next morning, I expected distance, awkwardness, maybe even avoidance. But when I walked into the kitchen, she was there, making coffee, her hair tied messily on top of her head. She looked up at me and smiled, a small but genuine smile that softened every sharp edge of my fear. She handed me a mug without a word, and for the first time in days, the silence felt less like a wall and more like a bridge. That small gesture, that smile, was enough to remind me that sometimes change doesn't happen all at once. Sometimes it's in the small, quiet moments, in the unspoken things that slowly grow into something real. And though I didn't know where we were heading, I knew one thing with certainty: I wasn't walking this path alone anymore. The shift between us was subtle but undeniable, like the soft change of seasons that you don't notice until suddenly the air feels different. Every little thing carried a new meaning now, the way she looked at me a fraction longer, the way her laughter seemed warmer, the way silence between us no longer felt heavy but alive, filled with something unspoken. I carried the memory of her smile in the kitchen like a secret treasure, replaying it over and over until it became proof that maybe I hadn't ruined everything, maybe I had cracked something open instead. One evening, after a long day, we found ourselves on the balcony, a place we rarely sat. The city stretched out before us, its lights flickering like stars, and the night air carried a coolness that made me pull my sweater tighter. She leaned against the railing, her gaze far away, lost in thought. I sat quietly beside her, sipping tea, trying not to intrude. After a while, she spoke softly, almost to herself. "You've always surprised me, you know. The way you notice things about people that no one else does. The way you make this place feel like home." Her words caught me off guard, sending a wave of warmth through me. I turned to look at her, but she kept her eyes on the city, as though she was too shy to meet mine. That I wanted to respond, to tell her how much she meant to me, but before I could, she finally turned, and our eyes locked. The quiet stretched, heavier and heavier, until it felt like something was pulling us closer without either of us moving. My breath caught in my chest, and I knew if I didn't look away, I would lose myself. But I didn't want to look away. Not this time. She broke the moment with a small laugh, shaking her head as if scolding herself for something. "I don't know what's happening to me," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But ever since you told me, I can't stop thinking about it. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear her words, but they sank into me like water into dry soil. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I hesitated, afraid of breaking the fragile honesty hanging between us. The silence after her confession was long, but it wasn't empty. I gathered all the courage I had, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I think about it too. Every day." For the first time, I saw her smile without hesitation, a smile that carried relief, as if she had been holding something back just like I had. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing against mine on the railing, and this time neither of us pulled away. The warmth of her hand settled over mine, gentle but sure, and I felt tears sting my eyes at the simplicity of it that we didn't need more words that night. We stood side by side, watching the city lights, our hands tangled quietly together, the world outside fading away. It wasn't a grand declaration, it wasn't fireworks or promises, but it was real. It was the kind of truth that didn't need to be shouted, it just needed to be felt. When we finally went back inside, the apartment felt different, lighter, as though the air itself had shifted. She moved around the kitchen, humming softly, and I followed, every step marked by the knowledge that something had finally begun. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel trapped between fear and silence. For the first time, I felt like we were finally moving together, even if neither of us knew exactly where it would lead. The morning after felt different in ways I couldn't put into words. The apartment looked the same soft light slipping through the curtains, the same hum of traffic outside, the same mug sitting on the counter, but to me everything had shifted. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was full, alive, almost comforting. I woke to the sound of her moving in the kitchen, and instead of my usual hesitation, I felt a pull to go to her, to be close without questioning it. When I stepped out, she turned, her hair messy from sleep, her smile small but steady, and for the first time I let myself smile back without holding anything in. We moved through the morning together like we always had, making coffee, talking about nothing important, but the difference was in the way her hand brushed mine and stayed there for a second longer, in the way her eyes lingered when I laughed, in the way my chest no longer burned with secrets. I had told her the truth, and instead of breaking us, it had brought us closer. It wasn't simple, it wasn't easy, but it was real, and that was enough. Later that day, we went for a walk, the air crisp and cool against our faces. We talked about the future, light-hearted at first, about travel and silly dreams, but then about deeper things. She admitted she was scared, that she didn't know what this meant yet, but she also admitted she didn't want to ignore it. Her honesty filled me with both fear and relief, because it reminded me that I wasn't the only one navigating unfamiliar ground. We were both uncertain, both afraid, but we were also both choosing not to turn away. That night, we sat together on the couch, a blanket thrown over our legs, the glow of the lamp soft around us. She leaned into me slowly, her head resting on my shoulder, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. My chest still raced, my thoughts still tumbled, but underneath it all was a quiet certainty. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I thought back to the night when everything had started, to the way I had stood frozen in the doorway, unsure of what I was feeling. I thought of the restless nights, the guilt, the fear, the silence that nearly crushed me. And now here we were, her head against my shoulder, her hand resting gently over mine, both of us breathing in sync. It wasn't a perfect ending, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something fragile, something brave, something worth every ache and every doubt. For the first time, I stopped running from myself. For the first time, I let the truth be enough. And as she turned her face toward me, her eyes soft and sure, I realized I wasn't just falling anymore, I had already fallen. And for once, I wasn't afraid of where I would land.